Main Street is a wonderful national network of over 1,000 communities, over 2,500 people focused on revitalizing downtown. And we do that through a framework, a common framework called the 4-point approach, which is focused on helping people organize for create a vision for their downtowns, organize to support that vision, really take advantage of the historic resources in their midst, focus on the economic underpinnings of their communities in terms of retaining the businesses they have, recruiting new businesses to support their communities, serve their communities, and of course putting together great promotions and events to really help people, draw people out downtown and show them a good time.
This is Destination Downtown 2014. This is a partnership that began in 1999 with Louisiana Main Street and Arkansas Main Street, and we have had this conference since those times, and we rotate it between the individual states. So every year a different state will host this in the 3-state lineup. So this is our year to host Destination Downtown, and we couldn't have picked a better place than our Great American Main Street Award winner in 2013, Ocean Springs, Mississippi.
Tell us about this historic building we're in.
This is the Mary C. O'Keefe Cultural Center. This was a high school. Really was one of the first in the Mississippi Heritage Trust 10 most endangered buildings in the state. Created quite a stir because the community really saw that as a black eye. But it called attention to this building, and step by step this building has been renovated and revitalized over those years. And it really is a testament not only to Ocean Springs, but really the Main Street approach.
We have 37 communities across the state of Louisiana that are Main Street programs, and it's really meant a program that has helped develop the identity and the unique qualities of our downtowns and our small towns across the state. We also work with some urban districts in New Orleans, but one of the things that makes Main Street so successful is that each one of our communities does have its own unique identity and its own culture, and Main Street programs celebrate that.
We have all sorts of things, from fantastic building rehabilitations to wonderful festivals and events, and certainly those are things that can be replicated anywhere across the country.
I want to talk about trends, major trends that I see influencing downtowns, whether they are small, rural communities, whether you're a mid-sized community, or whether you're a larger urban district, say in New Orleans. And then I want to take a step back and talk about what we're doing at the National Main Street Center to really respond to those trends. So I've got 5 things that I want to start out with highlighting. And the first thing I hope you all sense, I hope you all feel, which is that downtowns are back. Downtowns are, I think, enjoying a renaissance, and it is thanks to the hard work of all of you, but it is also, I think, thanks to a shifting cultural preference. So I live in Illinois now, in a suburb called Evanston, but work in Chicago. And there's another suburb in Illinois called Buffalo Grove. Anyone heard of it? This is a mid-century, kind of your traditional suburb. Grew up, there isn't much of a downtown. Well, I had to laugh earlier this week when the Sun-Times had a story about how they are proposing to demolish a portion of their town and build from scratch a Main Street, build from scratch a downtown, which, we've seen this done many, many places. They're not the first, they're just the latest. And quite frankly, they have a tough road ahead of them, because what we all know is it's very tough to manufacture that authenticity, that sense of character that grows out of the organic evolution of a downtown over time. But what it underlies is that we have something very valuable. You can look at it even as a commodity that's incredibly valuable that others are trying to replicate. So this is just kind of one signal among many that downtowns are coming back. Now, this was supposed to be the office of the future. Now, if you remember, go back in time with me, 10, 20 years, when the internet was new and suddenly people were saying, oh, place just isn't gonna matter anymore. You can work from anywhere. People are gonna work at home. They're not gonna bother going into the office anymore. And that's true. We see people working at home, but we see that It turns out that more than anything, what human beings like is other human beings. And the great irony of the technology age is that it's actually made place more important, not less important. That's why we see in our local coffee shops people setting up with laptops and doing work rather than doing it at home, because they don't want to be alone. They want to be in the presence of other people. And the same thing in terms of co-working facilities that are springing up everywhere. Have you seen these in your main streets as far as facilities that I may work for the National Main Street Center, but I'm hanging out with someone who works in technology or works in an education field, and it's a group of people that come together, quite frankly, because they don't want to be huddled at home all alone. They want that social interaction. They want the stimulation that comes from being with other people. Well, so people are making these individual choices, and that certainly has an impact in terms of revitalizing our downtown, but businesses are doing this too. We're seeing more and more businesses, this is true in smaller towns and bigger towns, gravitating towards traditional downtowns. And the reason they're doing it is because that's where their employees want to be. This is just one example, but this is our Great American Main Street Award winner this year. Harrisonburg, Virginia. Rosetta Stone is a mid-sized business that located in their downtown. I think they would tell you great things about the impact that this has had, of course, in terms of employees that go out for lunch, employees that go pick up their dry cleaning, just having people on the street that brings that presence back downtown, and we're really seeing this everywhere, so incredibly exciting. The other way we can look at this is in terms of the economics of this. Now, the Brookings Institution put out a study, it's a study that's called Walk This Way, and they essentially looked at the economic values associated with walkable neighborhoods like our downtowns or neighborhood districts that are just adjacent to it versus those neighborhoods that aren't walkable. And what they found is that rents are higher in those neighborhoods that are walkable, that housing values are higher in those neighborhoods, and the capitalization rates are better. So these underlying economic statistics also tell us, okay, this is where there's additional value. So all of this, I think, portends great things for Main Street. It offers a lot for us to build on. This next slide is really a transition to my second point, which is talking about the rise of interest in living downtown. But you can see that this same Walk This Way Brookings study, what they really concluded looking at all of the data was that there's a bit of a shift going on in the American public, which is away from a preference towards living in unwalkable, often suburban places, more towards living and working and playing in more walkable, more mixed-use places. Now, we know this isn't true of everyone. Suburbs aren't just going to go away, but there's I think a lot of momentum to build on here in terms of renewing our downtown, and I hope all of you are feeling that and sensing that. So, National Association of Realtors, big umbrella group that looks at real estate trends and works with realtors nationally, is also seeing very similar things, which is the Americans' preference moving towards walkability. And there are two demographics that are really behind this, and you may have already heard this before, but it's worth sharing again. One is millennials, who a very large generation, that this is a group that's getting their driver's license much later in life than any other group in history. They would much prefer to go out and buy that $400 iPad, $400 iPhone, go out to eat, connect with their friends. They're just not as interested in investing in, muscle cars or other forms of personal transportation. We're seeing a big resurgence of these folks living downtown, being interested in that mixed-use, walkable neighborhood experience. And then boomers, which you'd think that, all boomers just were ready to strip off their shirt and have a wild party. This is at the Woodstock, I think, 30th anniversary. But boomers are also driving this. And I have to say, I have seen this in so many places. I would even venture to say, but all but one of the cities that I visited over the last year with Main Street, that both of these demographics are really fueling downtown revitalization. I naively thought, starting out in Main Street a little over a year ago, that housing was a big deal in urban, but it's such a big deal in rural and small communities as well, and that's an incredibly exciting thing to see. Just one quick example, Mount Vernon, Iowa. This is a little town in northeastern Iowa that I had the opportunity to visit a few months back. This is a place where I think 10 years ago there was hardly an upper story that was used, and at this point I think maybe all but one or two have been transitioned into upper floor housing, and this is the hot housing in Mount Vernon. This is where you want to be. And then, of course, there's my favorite example, which was the second Main Street I ever visited as a National Main Street Center, which is Siloam Springs, Arkansas. That's right, a shout out. I knew that would get something. Where downtown housing is fueling a revitalization there as well. So just incredibly exciting for all of us to see. Now, this slide I stole from our friends in North Carolina, Liz Parham, who I was with yesterday at the City Manager Conference in Charlotte. And we did a presentation where she talked about the impacts of downtown housing in North Carolina communities. And I thought this was a really powerful explanation of the economic impacts associated with just one unit of residential housing downtown. Now, they looked at different rent levels from $400 all the way up to $1,200, and you can see that the impact of just one unit is anywhere from about $8,000 to $19,000 a year. The exciting thing is you don't need 100, 150 units of housing downtown to start to see an impact. 10, 12, you start to see a real difference, and I think that's pretty exciting. The other thing I wanted to talk about this morning is financing. Now, this is both a good news and a bad news story for those of us who are interested in trying to rehabilitate the buildings we see around us. Now, it's no secret that the federal tax credit is under threat, and many state historic tax credits are under threat as well. North Carolina just lost theirs very recently. And so the National Trust Community Investment Corporation, which is a sister subsidiary of the National Main Street Center, is leading a campaign to save the federal historic tax credits, and is working very hard to make sure that this continues to be a source of funding for rehabilitation projects. But there's one important piece here, which is especially relevant to Main Streets. Many of you know that the sort of the baseline costs associated with using the rehabilitation tax credit, the federal credit, is very high and puts it out of range for many of our smaller Main Street projects. So what they're doing, in addition to advocating for the continuance of the federal historic tax credits, is also putting together a coalition that would increase the incentive, essentially move it above 20%, I think, to 30%, for tax credit projects that are under $5 million, to put these more in range for Main Street style buildings. So I am very hopeful that we will be successful with this effort. This is something where we need all of your help in communicating to your congressmen, to your senators, the importance of this for our communities. So I would urge you to get involved and let me know. Please come up and let me know if you have any questions or want to get more involved. Now, this is really hot off the presses. How many of you are familiar with New Markets tax credits? Oh yeah, okay, so I just heard Ben give a really exasperated sigh for a very good reason. So New Markets tax credits, another federal source of financing, which can be very helpful and actually is a very robust source of financing, but to say that, the paperwork, the technical aspects of it can be quite overwhelming. This is another credit that is frankly outside of often beyond the realm for Main Streets. The National Trust Community Investment Corporation came to us recently at Main Street and asked about our willingness to work with them in developing a small deal fund, which would essentially remove, as I understand it, much of the red tape associated with these projects for Main Street style buildings that are in that $2 to $3 million range. So we're working very hard to pull this together. It's not a sure bet. They're proposing this right now to Treasury and working to get this allocation of the credit. But it is, I share it with you as an example of what we're working on, and certainly something that I'd like to see come into fruition to put these funding sources more within the reach of our Main Street communities. Now, this next pocket or next couple of slides is really focused on something completely different, which is, federal funding, extremely complex, is going to require a very heavy advocacy effort on our part to get what we need. Crowdfunding is moving on a much different track, which is how is it that we can tap into the resources in our communities that already exist to make great projects happen. Now, you've probably heard about crowdfunding in any number of formats, crowdfunding for community gardens, for events. There is one, and I mentioned this in Detroit, but it's worth mentioning again because there are a number of firms out there that are doing great work around real estate development, crowdsourced real estate development, which is to say that they're looking at these smaller neighborhood-style buildings that are often, they're either overlooked by developers or they are looked at way too closely by developers in terms of they come in, decide they want to assemble 5 sites and build something entirely new. These guys are focused on closing the equity gap for these small projects. And the way they do it is by raising money from people in the neighborhood like you and me. So for as little as $100, you can own a share of a building. Now this is an example of a project that's been done in H Street, which is a very distressed, although quickly turning around neighborhood in DC. So they not only crowdsourced the funding for a portion of this project, they crowdsourced the use. They reached out to the community and they said, what is it that you want this building to be? And I think, if I recall correctly, they really wanted a sushi restaurant. So now it's a sushi restaurant. This is something where, unfortunately, SEC regulations have changed and made this more possible. And I really, it's always dangerous to predict anything, but I predict that we're going to see this as a more significant source of funding for our Main Street style buildings in the years to come. And then there's another group that I just wanted to recommend to you for consideration. We're actually talking about developing a partnership with them at Main Street Center. This is a group called IOB. They do crowdsource funding, not in this case for real estate development, but for things like community gardens, for events, that sort of thing. What's unique about them is they don't just say, hey, here's a platform for you to go raise money. They have a whole series of training, and you go through, it's a whole class of folks, several folks at once that go through this training together. They really teach you the basics of this kind of fundraising, how to really create a successful campaign, and I think they have much, much better results because of it. So great group to get to know, and I hope you'll see something coming from us at the National Main Street Center on this very shortly. So the next major trend that I wanted to highlight for you is focused on placemaking. Now, how many of you have heard the term placemaking? Okay, all right, good. All right, so this is really about reclaiming streets for people. And this is like sustainability. There are as many different definitions for placemaking out there as there are people in this room. Bottom line is, make of it what you will. It's all about creating places, in this case downtown, that are going to help draw people out, going to help bring people to your merchants, going to help foster that sense of community. Now, I think this is particularly exciting for us because with Main Street, we talk about it being incremental. And we've heard this morning about the importance of persistence and how long-term this work is, and that is absolutely true. It is very rare that you see something turn around overnight. But what placemaking, what this focus on reclaiming streets offers is it is lighter, quicker, and cheaper, right? It's something where you can claim short-term wins that really demonstrate to the community that there's a sense of momentum, that there's something going on downtown, that there's reason to celebrate. So I'm just sharing 2 examples with you, and I grant you these are examples from very large cities. There is absolutely no reason this can't be done in your town. So this is Times Square, New York, which, as many of you know, was recently closed off into a pedestrian-only area. But what they did, just as an experiment, is threw a bunch of lawn chairs out there, right? And you're seeing this at the beginning, but I'm told that it was crowded and people loved it, and they stopped and they hung out. And And it was just a great sort of community feeling, even in an area like New York where you wouldn't expect there to be much community. So no reason you can't borrow some lawn chairs, get permission to close down the street. You probably should get permission to close down the street first. Throw them out in the street and see what happens. There's another example. If you were in Marcia Square, which is where we had our reception right after the Detroit opening, another great example. Now this one, not quite as cheap, because what they did is they went and they dumped a bunch of sand there in May of 2013, and they created a beach for the whole summer in the middle of Detroit, which was enormously popular. So again, you may not have the resources or the wherewithal to dump a bunch of sand in the middle of your street or in the middle of your park, but I think it demonstrates that, you know, the sky's the limit. You can be as creative here as you want, and good for the community, good for the soul. And again, I think in a context of working over the long term where results can be a little slow, it's so helpful to have these short-term wins. I had the pleasure of participating in a very similar event in Evanston, where I live, just the weekend before last. We closed down the whole Main Street, which really is a main street, right in my neighborhood. And, just tons of games for kids. Opened it up to walking and biking, and there was just tons of people there. Everybody loved it. It was like a huge block party, super cheap, easy to do, not that hard in this case to convince the city to do it, and something that I think is very usable, a usable example for all of us. So I want to wrap up here talking about a fifth theme, which is about greening downtowns. And I offer this one you can think about this in two ways. One is a compelling environmental need to green downtown or to green our buildings, to save energy. That's one approach, and certainly valid. But there's another aspect of this, which is saving money. And my previous position was as director of the Preservation Green Lab, which is an organization within the National Trust, a program of the National Trust that looks at how do we encourage reuse and retrofits, greening of older and historic buildings. And we actually did a study looking at what Main Street businesses or Main Street property owners spend on their energy every month. And it turns out that they spend more on their energy than any other class of business owners in the country. Now, the great news there is it means that they stand to benefit more if you can go in and help them with some of the basic retrofitting pieces, or even some of the more advanced heating and cooling improvements. So the Preservation Green Lab went to the Department of Energy and said, hey, we have this huge untapped need in America's main streets. In terms of greening these buildings and essentially putting more money back in the pockets of local business owners, local property owners, which we hope they will then, of course, use to reinvest in their businesses, reinvest in their communities. This resulted in it's a $2 million grant from the Department of Energy, a total of a $4 million project, which is focused on greening buildings in America's downtowns and America's main streets. So we are working right now in several areas in this first phase. You can see that we're all across the country at this point with what is really a preliminary data gathering phase, which sounds incredibly boring, but is incredibly important and really paves the path for us to be able to help business owners save energy at scale. So if you have any interest in this project, I encourage you to visit mainstreet.org or to let me know afterwards, and I would be happy to put you in touch with our wonderful project manager on this. It's really exciting, great work. There are grants available for participating. I think they're in the $2,500 to $5,000 range. So I'd be happy to talk with you more about that. But I put this up here because I think that the Department of Energy's interest in this was a major signal. I hope that we'll see more attention, more dollars, more energy directed towards this very important issue, which really impacts our pocketbooks or the pocketbooks of business owners. All right, So hopefully you draw from all of that, that while there may be some challenges, that downtowns are hot. Well, we've seen tremendous success in the last 30 years, 35 years actually, close to $60 billion invested in our Main Street communities, downtowns, a tremendous amount of investment at a time when really a lot of investment tended to be going out into the urban fringe, into strip malls and big boxes and that sort of thing. So we're very, very proud of that investment. We've also seen close to 500,000 new jobs during that time, 115,000 net new businesses, and then we're also very proud of this number, close to 250,000 buildings that have been rehabilitated. Often those were buildings that, communities thought were sort of left for dead and were brought back from the brink and revitalized, and new life was brought to them.
What kind of progress have you seen in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Arkansas?
Well, I think we are just so proud of the work that's happening in all three of those states, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Arkansas. I'm thrilled to be here in Mississippi for the first time, and I'm looking forward to visiting the communities here in the state with Bob Wilson, the coordinator. Ocean Springs, where we are today, was our Great American Main Street Award winner last year, which is really a credit to the effort that they've put in revitalizing this very special place over the last I think it's close to 25 years for them. Arkansas was the very first state I visited once I joined the National Main Street Center. I've been tremendously impressed there by the state as well and the wonderful work they're doing. I'm actually going to be going back there in early November this year, and can't wait to spend some time with them. And then Louisiana, of course, such a wonderful story of resilience in those Main Street communities, especially those that were in the path of Hurricane Katrina.
The Main Street approach was originally developed in the early 80s by the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and it's a proven method to revitalize communities. During that time is when the malls and the strip centers come to be, and a lot of perimeter retailers started to develop, and those downtown businesses started to move to those strip centers and to the malls, and really left a hole in the core of the community, the downtown. Main Street was developed to really come into those communities and revitalize them and make them vibrant once again. What started out as a test project in 1980 now spawns about 2,000 Main Street programs across the United States.
I think the Main Street program is an excellent program just because it does reach out to entrepreneurs, and that's a lot of what our creative economy program is.
Our message today is use what you have. The Mississippi Main Street is a great organization to help communities use what they have to better circumvent what they have to use for the betterment of the community.
Mississippi Homecoming is our new ad campaign, and it's basically promoting the Year of the Creative Economy, which is a partnership that we have with the Office of Governor Phil Bryant.
Here's the good news. This year, Mississippi's throwing a homecoming party. If you've been touched by our music, books, art, food, then this is home. This is your party, because really, everybody's a Mississippian. So grab a bag and a few friends. No RSVP required. It's gonna be Saturday night all year long. Why don't you come join us?